I always believed that if the day arrived when I would be terminated from my executive role, I would see the warning signs in advance. A hallway rumor, a guarded glance from compliance officers, or a polite corporate warning explaining that organizational restructuring was underway. But reality delivered no such courtesy. It struck with the cold precision of an unexpected foreclosure notice, abrupt, clinical, and arriving precisely at 8 o'clock on a freezing Tuesday morning. To understand how a decade of devotion dissolved into ashes, I must rewind to the afternoon before. New York City was wrapped in an autumn chill that made hot coffee look as though it were breathing steam. I stepped into the skyscraper housing Crestview Financial Partners, where I had dedicated 9 years of my professional life. I had poured my intellect and my soul into those trading floors. On that quiet Monday, I wore my charcoal wool blazer, carefully pinning to the lapel a silver pocket watch chain my father had given me when I first passed the National Financial Risk Examinations. He told me the chain was to remind me that time in corporate life is relentless, and competence is the only true shield an honest man possesses. The executive boardroom sat on the 38th floor, offering an arrogant view of the East River. The room seemed built specifically to communicate power, whispering that Crestview watched the commercial world from high above the clouds. Seated at the head of the polished mahogany table was Jeffrey Hallowell, the 48-year-old executive vice president of portfolio management. Sunlight reflected off his luxury watch with a sharp glare. He held my formal application for senior managing partner, turning the parchment pages as though skimming a lunch menu. "I have reviewed your application for senior partner, Julian," Jeffrey began, his voice dripping with condescension. "And what is your verdict?" I asked, keeping my hands flat on the table, even though my right knee had begun a faint tap beneath the desk, the familiar reflex that surfaced whenever an executive was preparing to betray a promise. Joffrey looked up, removed his reading glasses, and offered a practiced smile. It was the specific corporate smile designed to signal bad news while expecting you to admire the man delivering it. "A promotion to senior partner, Julian? Frankly, I do not believe you possess executive material. Perhaps in another 3 or 4 years we can revisit the topic." His words hit the table like ice water dumped over critical paperwork, messy, sudden, and impossible to ignore. I swallowed hard, adjusting my collar. "Not executive material?" I repeated, keeping my tone measured. "After I spent 5 months designing the stabilization architecture for the $7.5 billion Apex Dynamics corporate restructuring? The exact transaction that saved Crestview when foreign institutional investors threatened to pull their liquidity." Jeffrey gave a dismissive shrug. "You performed admirable quantitative work, Julian. No one disputes your technical competency. But at the upper executive level, technical skill is merely the baseline. We require executive presence, strategic political vision, and social charisma. You spend your hours buried behind risk algorithms and data terminals. That is not leadership." Political charisma, the favorite shield of corporate managers who never comprehend technical mechanics, yet always position themselves nearest to the microphones when trophies are distributed. I did not raise my voice. I did not engage in desperate pleading. I offered a brief, formal nod. What Wall Street professionals call the corporate bow. It is a gesture not of submission, but of absolute closure. "Thank you for your candid assessment, Mr. Hallowell," I said, standing upright. "I trust you will have the revised portfolio risk models for the sovereign account on my desk by 5 o'clock, Jeffrey added, his eyes dropping back to his laptop screen. His porcelain mug made a sharp click against the coaster, the sound of absolute indifference. I walked out without uttering another word. I passed the glass conference room where, 3 months earlier, I had spent 48 consecutive hours mapping the risk framework that rescued the Apex deal. Now the room sat empty and silent, as though the intellectual capital I had invested there had been systematically erased. That evening, I returned to my home in the borough. My mother, Eleanor Vance, 76 years old, sat near the window wrapped in a soft knitted blanket. She had undergone her second session of specialized medical treatment the previous afternoon. The last time I accompanied her to the medical facility, I was forced to review quantitative bond yields on my laptop from the waiting room chair, sipping cold coffee while attempting to balance family duty with executive demands. She had placed her frail hand over mine and asked if I was remembering to breathe. I prepared a quiet dinner for Eleanor and my 11-year-old son, Gabriel. When Gabriel ran down the stairs carrying his school notebook, I forced my posture upright and my expression cheerful. "Did you finish your advanced mathematics homework, Gabriel?" I asked, setting a warm bowl of soup before him. "All finished, Dad," Gabriel replied, watching me intently. "You are home before 7 o'clock. Did your evening strategy meeting get canceled?" "No more late strategy meetings for a while, son," I said with a calm smile. "I will be home for dinner every night moving forward." Gabriel smiled brightly, unconcerned with corporate politics, and returned to his reading. Children possess an uncanny ability to sense emotional tension, yet they also know when to grant their parents grace. The next morning, at precisely 8 o'clock, the digital notification arrived on my private corporate device. Subject line: Employment Termination Notice. Corporate Restructuring. The message formally invoked Title 29 of the United States Code, Section 2101, citing the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act to rationalize an immediate severance without prior 30-day notice. I read the clinical paragraphs 3 times to ensure there was no administrative error. Crestview had formally severed my employment, effective immediately, less than 18 hours after denying my promotion. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, I walked through the granite lobby of Crestview Financial Partners for the final time. In my hands, I carried a cardboard container holding my father's silver watch chain, 9 years of analytical notebooks, and a solitary fountain pen. I paused near the glass wall and caught my reflection, 54 years old, clad in a dark suit, my graying hair neat, my eyes cold and entirely devoid of fear. I did not rage. I did not utter idle threats to the security guard instructed to escort me out. Only one razor-sharp thought echoed in my mind. Jeffrey believes that removing the central architectural pillar makes the building more profitable. He is about to discover that without the pillar, the ceiling collapses without warning. The first evening following my termination felt longer than any night I had experienced in my 9 years at Crestview. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked with steady cadence, serving as the sole element in my life undisturbed by corporate betrayal. After ensuring Eleanor had taken her medication and Gabriel was asleep, I retreated to my private study on the second floor. Under the warm glow of a desk lamp, I opened my personal workstation. The terminal screen illuminated my face with lines of raw algorithmic code, the proprietary quantitative core, known as the Vance Analytics System or the VAS engine. 9 years ago, when Crestview's legacy risk models failed to predict volatile credit defaults, I independently developed this algorithmic architecture from scratch. It was a real-time risk evaluation matrix capable of calculating portfolio stress points, bond yield anomalies, and liquidity threats 48 hours before traditional Wall Street models registered the shift. Over the past decades, the VAS engine had saved Crestview Financial Partners from at least 4 major market panics. Jeffrey Hallowell had consistently referred to the platform as an internal Crestview asset. Yet, in his hubris, Jeffrey never authorized an engineering team to document or audit the codebase. Whenever I requested budget allocation to train junior analysts on the engine's core framework, Jeffrey dismissed my proposals, stating, "Just keep the platform functioning smoothly, Julian. We do not need to waste executive capital explaining complex mathematical mechanics to junior staff." As a direct result of his arrogance, no individual alive understood the cryptographic keys, data feeds, or manual override protocols of the VAS engine, except for me. Furthermore, because I authored the foundational algorithms prior to signing my initial employment contract with Crestview, the underlying intellectual property remained legally bound to my personal estate under Title 17 of the United States Code, Section 106. Which governs exclusive rights in original technical works. I stared at the blinking cursor. Part of my upbringing urged me to leave the security tokens active, to maintain what corporate ethicists call professional goodwill, but a stronger voice inside reminded me that Crestview had committed a bad faith termination, engaging in what legal scholars term a tortious breach of fiduciary duty. They had discarded 9 years of unwavering devotion as if it were worthless scrap paper. No corporate entity has the right to demand continued generosity from an architect they systematically discarded, I whispered to the empty room. My fingers moved across the mechanical keyboard with calm precision. I navigated to the root security directory and initiated the master command. Revoke primary security access token. The terminal prompted a final security confirmation. Are you certain you wish to permanently terminate master cryptographic authorization for Crestview Capital Network nodes? I typed the word confirm without hesitation. My hands did not tremble. It was not an act of emotional vengeance. It was the simple, lawful reclamation of my personal intellectual property. The screen flashed bright white before displaying a single status line. Master cryptographic access token revoked. All dependent analytical data feeds suspended. I closed the laptop, leaned back in my leather armchair, and took a deep breath. For the first time in 9 years, I was no longer carrying the uncompensated burden of keeping an arrogant executive's career afloat. Over the next 4 weeks, the corporate world outside my home did not collapse instantly. Systemic institutional failures rarely manifest with sudden explosions. They begin with subtle anomalies. At Crestview headquarters, internal quantitative tables began exhibiting calculation errors. Automated portfolio risk alerts failed to trigger when foreign currency values fluctuated. A major syndicated debt deal with Sovereign and Drake Financial experienced a 2-week delay because Crestview's team could not generate the mandatory risk compliance documentation that I had personally authored for half a decade. The internal technology department at Crestview attempted to bypass the system lock by installing generic third-party risk software. They failed to realize that the VAS engine was deeply integrated into Crestview's institutional clearinghouse. Deprived of my daily manual recalibrations and security tokens, the system fed static, outdated yield curves to the trading desks. Rather than investigating the root cause, Jeffrey Hallowell walked into executive committee meetings every morning at 8:30, holding a gourmet coffee, exuding unearned confidence. He assured senior partners that minor operational discrepancies were merely temporary transitional glitches resulting from routine IT upgrades. Julian Vance was simply an operational caretaker, Jeffrey declared during a leaked executive memo. Our institutional framework is self-sustaining and entirely independent of any single individual. I laughed softly when a former junior analyst forwarded me a copy of that internal memo. It was a cold laugh. Jeffrey was about to learn that when an uneducated driver removes the engine from a racing vehicle, the car does not continue to run on executive hubris. By the end of the 3rd week following my departure, Crestview's incompetence materialized into financial disaster, guided by uncalibrated risk metrics from the locked engine. Jeffrey authorized the allocation of $85 million of institutional capital into a speculative commercial real estate investment trust that was rapidly heading toward restructuring. When the automated risk report flagged the investment as high risk, Jeffrey manually overrode the warning, writing in the log, "Data entry anomaly. Proceed with capital deployment." Simultaneously, Hyperion Trust, one of Crestview's premier institutional accounts managing over $580 million in active portfolios, demanded an immediate, comprehensive audit of their 2nd quarter performance metrics. They did not request a meeting with Jeffrey Hallowell. They demanded to speak directly with Crestview's chief legal counsel and head of compliance. It was during this escalating crisis that Audrey Sinclair, Crestview's Director of Human Resources and Risk Compliance, began to realize the full extent of the danger. Audrey was a sharp 50-year-old compliance veteran who had always maintained a quiet respect for my work. Walking past Jeffrey's glass office, she observed him screaming at junior traders as portfolio error logs piled up on his desk. Audrey stepped into his office, closing the heavy door behind her. "Jeffrey, we have received 3 formal inquiries from Hyperion Trust regarding portfolio valuation discrepancies. They are requesting the underlying quantitative logs built on Julian's risk framework." Jeffrey did not look up from his phone. "We are no longer utilizing Julian's outdated framework. Tell them the audit report will be delivered by Friday. We cannot deliver what no one in this building knows how to calculate." Audrey replied, her voice firm. Julian did not merely operate the system, he was the system, and right now every portfolio we manage is operating blind. Jeffrey slammed his hand onto his desk, his face flushing crimson. I prohibit you from speaking his name in this office. Everyone in this industry is replaceable, Audrey. Make the numbers balance, or I will find a compliance director who can. Audrey offered a slow, cold nod, the exact same bow I had given 4 weeks earlier. Understood, Mr. Hallowell. She knew, as I knew, that when an executive resorting to shouting replaces facts with threats, the institution's end is no longer a matter of if, but when. While the foundation at Crestview Financial Partners began to fracture under the weight of executive arrogance, I focused my energies on rebuilding my professional life on my own terms. I spent my mornings walking Gabriel to his school, enjoying the crisp autumn air. In the afternoons, I assisted Eleanor with her physical rehabilitation exercises, ensuring her recovery remained our family's highest priority. 4 weeks after my termination from Crestview, I received a secure digital communication from Grant Montgomery. Grant was a 46-year-old managing principal at Sovereign and Drake Financial, one of Wall Street's most respected investment firms. Grant and I had first crossed paths 3 years earlier during a joint venture negotiation. At the time, Grant represented foreign institutional investors, while I presented Crestview's risk architecture. I recalled that initial meeting. In a boardroom filled with aggressive executives who relied on vague buzzwords and grand promises, Grant had sat quietly, taking meticulous notes. During a coffee break, he approached me in the corridor, offered a firm handshake, and said, "Your quantitative risk model is brilliant, Mr. Vance. It is a pity your boss will change the title slide, append his name, and take credit for your intellect." I smiled back then, unable to publicly confirm his accurate observation. Now, 3 years later, Grant's text message contained only 6 words. "Are you ready to build again?" We met the following afternoon at a quiet coffee establishment tucked away in Soho. The venue featured exposed brick walls, dark oak paneling, and the subtle hum of jazz music, a stark contrast to the sterile atmosphere of Wall Street executive suites. Grant was already seated in a corner booth, wearing a sharp-tailored suit without a tie, exuding the confidence of a leader who prioritized substance over corporate theater. He slid a leather-bound project dossier across the polished wooden table. "I will not waste your time with corporate pleasantries, Julian," Grant stated directly. "Sovereign and Drake is launching a new institutional quantitative platform, the Vanguard Enterprise Risk Architecture. We want you to join us as a senior managing partner and chief systems architect. Full operational autonomy, zero bureaucratic interference, and complete ownership of your proprietary code base." I opened the dossier, reviewing the architectural diagrams, capital allocations, and organizational charts. The scope of the project was immense, designed to manage high-yield, institutional portfolios while integrating strict environmental and corporate governance standards. "This is an ambitious architecture, Grant," I remarked, tracing the system flowcharts with my pen. "Developing this platform to full operational capability will require intensive engineering and a dedicated team of quantitative specialists." Grant smiled, leaning forward. "You will have an unlimited development budget and absolute authority to recruit every quantitative engineer you trust." I watched Jeffrey Hallowell exploit your brilliance for nearly a decade while presenting your work as his own. It is time the financial sector recognizes who actually built the engine. I closed the dossier, looking Grant directly in the eye. "My intention is not to engage in pettiness or destructive corporate warfare, Grant. My goal is simple. I refuse to allow incompetent managers to hide behind my silence any longer." "They will not be able to hide much longer," Grant replied coolly. "Crestview's institutional clients are already asking hard questions. When you step into the light as our managing partner, Crestview will be forced to explain why they terminated the very mind that kept their firm solvent." That evening, I returned to my private study with a renewed sense of purpose. I created a fresh primary system directory titled Vanguard Core. For the first time in 9 years, I was designing a quantitative architecture not as an underpaid corporate employee seeking approval from arrogant superiors, but as a principal architect building a lasting institutional legacy. However, Jeffrey Hallowell was not prepared to collapse quietly. Realizing that Crestview's portfolio valuations were plunging and that institutional clients were threatening legal action, Jeffrey launched a desperate public relations campaign to shift blame away from his executive failures. On a Monday morning, a financial news publication released an article featuring anonymous quotes from senior Crestview executives. The headline read, "Former senior quantitative analyst accused of intellectual property conversion and corporate sabotage at Crestview." The article asserted that an unnamed senior analyst had improperly removed proprietary risk codes upon departure, deliberately causing calculation errors that damaged client portfolios. Accompanying the article was an old corporate photograph of me standing beside Jeffrey at an industry conference. 5 years earlier, the narrative was crafted to frame me as a bitter ex-employee who had destroyed institutional assets out of resentment over a denied promotion. My phone rang continuously as industry colleagues, legal professionals, and financial journalists sought my commentary. Gabriel looked at the news report on his tablet with concern, asking, "Dad, why are they writing these untruths about you?" I placed a reassuring hand on my son's shoulder. In business, Gabriel, when individuals lack the competence to fix their own mistakes, they often construct lies to protect their pride. Truth, however, does not require volume. It only requires documentation. Grant Montgomery called me immediately following the publication. "Jeffrey has overstepped, Julian. This is actionable defamation under civil law. We can release a public statement from Sovereign and Drake immediately." "Not yet, Grant," I responded calmly. "Jeffrey wants a public shouting match to confuse institutional investors. Let him exhaust his narratives. When a man digs a pit of deceit, you do not interrupt him. You simply wait until he has dug it deep enough that he cannot climb out." I opened a secure hard drive containing my personal archives from my 9 years at Crestview. I did not possess stolen corporate data. What I possessed was a flawless record of my personal professional communications. Every risk warning I had ever submitted, every automated system error log, and every explicit email instruction from Jeffrey Hallowell directing me to bypass quantitative risk limits was safely documented. Specifically, I located a critical email thread from 3 months prior regarding the Apex Dynamics transaction. I had sent 3 formal written warnings to Jeffrey, highlighting underlying debt instabilities in Apex's secondary subsidiaries. Jeffrey had replied to the final warning with a single line: "Risk noted. Disregard parameters and mark approved for executive presentation." Jeffrey believed he had buried those warnings deep within Crestview's internal servers. He had forgotten that, as a meticulous risk architect, I maintained verified, time-stamped digital duplicates of all compliance-related correspondence on my private drive. "Jeffrey believes he is playing chess," I murmured, staring at the time-stamped emails on my screen. "He does not realize I am the one who drafted the rules of the game." 48 hours after Crestview Financial Partners published their defamatory press leaks, I decided it was time to deliver a precise response. I did not hire an expensive crisis public relations firm, nor did I issue an aggressive press release filled with hostile threats. Instead, I set up a simple digital camera in my home study. Wearing a clean dark suit, sitting before a neutral backdrop without special lighting, I recorded a concise video message lasting precisely 2 minutes and 43 seconds. "Good evening," I began, my voice calm, steady, and entirely devoid of anger. "My name is Julian Vance. For 9 years, I served as the senior portfolio risk architect at Crestview Financial Partners. Recent media reports have alleged that my departure resulted in corporate sabotage and the unlawful conversion of proprietary analytical systems. Rather than engaging in public speculation, I believe institutional investors deserve total operational transparency." On the screen behind me, I displayed verified, timestamped PDF copies of my official written correspondence with Jeffrey Hallowell. I highlighted the 3 explicit risk warnings I had submitted regarding the Apex Dynamics deal, followed by Jeffrey's digital signature overriding safety parameters. I then presented documentation proving that the underlying mathematical code of the VAS engine was authored independently by me prior to my employment at Crestview, making it my exclusive intellectual property under Title 17 of the United States Code, Section 106. I concluded the video with a single statement. No dedicated professional desires to see their former institution falter. However, when corporate failure is the direct result of executive negligence and the deliberate suppression of risk warnings, that failure belongs entirely to the executives who chose to ignore the data. I uploaded the video directly to my professional LinkedIn network and financial media platforms. I appended no sensationalist captions or dramatic rhetoric. I simply allowed the documented evidence to speak for itself. The impact across Wall Street was immediate and devastating. Within 12 hours, the video surpassed 1,300,000 views. Financial analysts, institutional investors, and compliance experts dissected the documented evidence. Major financial media outlets retracted their previous articles, replacing them with investigative reports focused on Crestview's corporate governance failures. Crestview's publicly traded stocks experienced a violent collapse, falling by 28% in a single trading session. Institutional clients flooded Crestview's switchboards with redemption requests, demanding immediate third-party audits of all managed accounts. At 9:30 that evening, my private mobile phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unlisted Manhattan number. I permitted the phone to ring 4 times before answering. "Julian," Jeffrey Hallowell's voice came through the speaker. It was no longer the arrogant voice of the executive vice president who had mocked my career 4 weeks earlier. It was strained, raspy, and trembling with desperation. "We need to meet immediately." "It is late, Jeffrey," I replied coolly, standing by my study window. "Name a location in Midtown," Jeffrey insisted, his composure entirely shattered. "Private, neutral ground. We must resolve this matter before the markets open tomorrow morning." "Very well," I said. "The lounge at the St. Regis. 30 minutes." When I arrived at the hotel lounge, the atmosphere was quiet and subdued. Jeffrey was seated in a shadowy corner booth, his designer suit jacket removed, his tie loosened, and an untouched glass of scotch resting on the marble table before him. He looked 10 years older than he had a month ago, dark circles lining his eyes. "You still arrive precisely on time," Jeffrey remarked as I seated myself opposite him. "Punctuality is an executive habit, Jeffrey," I replied calmly, gesturing to the waiter that I required only sparkling water. "State the purpose of this meeting." Jeffrey leaned across the table, lowering his voice to an intense whisper. "I am not here to offer insincere apologies, Julian. We are both realistic men of finance. You have inflicted severe reputational damage on Crestview. The board is in pure panic, and our primary institutional accounts are threatening to liquidate over $600 million in assets by Friday." "The damage was not inflicted by me, Jeffrey," I corrected him gently. "It was inflicted by your decision to override quantitative risk metrics and dismiss the architect who built your foundation." Jeffrey took a deep breath, attempting to regain a posture of authority. "I am prepared to offer you a settlement. Crestview will pay you $2 million in severance, drop all intellectual property claims, and offer you a formal senior vice president title with full management oversight. But you must issue a public statement tomorrow morning confirming that system discrepancies were caused by an external software glitch, not executive negligence." I stared at him for several seconds in total silence. The quiet stretched between us until Jeffrey shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "That is a generous resolution, Julian." Jeffrey pushed, his eyes darting nervously. "You get the title, the financial compensation, and the recognition you wanted." I reached into my pocket, pulled out my father's silver pocket watch, and set it softly on the marble table between us. "You still do not comprehend the situation, Jeffrey," I said, leaning forward. "You believe that every man has a price, and that integrity can be negotiated in a hotel lounge at midnight. You offered me a deal because you are terrified of the institutional audit scheduled for Wednesday morning." I pointed a calm finger toward the left lapel of his tailored suit jacket. "Furthermore, you might want to deactivate the digital micro-recorder hidden inside your inner pocket. The faint red LED indicator is reflecting against your water glass." Jeffrey froze, his face draining of all color. He instinctively reached toward his jacket, caught red-handed in a desperate attempt to trap me into an extortion statement. Did you truly believe that after 9 years of monitoring systemic risks, I would fail to notice a rudimentary recording device? I asked, a faint smile touching my lips. I brought no recording devices, Jeffrey, because unlike you, I do not require hidden traps to prove the truth. The institutional audit on Wednesday will uncover the tortious breach of fiduciary duty, the dissipation of corporate assets, and your deliberate falsification of risk logs. I picked up my father's watch, placed it securely into my pocket, and stood up from the booth. Enjoy your scotch, Jeffrey. You are going to need it when the board of directors convenes on Wednesday. I turned and walked out of the lounge, leaving him sitting alone in the dim amber light. The final blow to Jeffrey Hallowell's executive tenure struck at 10 o'clock on Wednesday morning. International financial news channels reported that Crestview Financial Partners had officially lost their primary European institutional account. A $1.1 billion sovereign investment mandate. The cancellation was directly attributed to Crestview's inability to provide certified quantitative risk reports under their locked analytics platform. Inside the Crestview executive suite on the 38th floor, pure chaos reigned. Trading desks were silent, phones rang unanswered, and senior partners paced the corridors in visible distress. At 10:30 a.m., Audrey Sinclair, Director of HR and Risk Compliance, walked into the grand boardroom where the entire board of directors had convened for an emergency session. Audrey carried a thick compliance dossier. She set the folder firmly at the center of the conference table. "Members of the board," Audrey announced, her voice echoing clearly across the room. "I am formally submitting the complete internal compliance audit regarding portfolio risk management and executive conduct over the past 24 months. The chairman of the board, an elder statesman of Wall Street, frowned. "What does this dossier contain, Miss Sinclair?" "It contains complete, verified digital records proving that Executive Vice President Jeffrey Hallowell repeatedly engaged in gross negligence, tortious breach of fiduciary duty, and the deliberate falsification of executive risk disclosures," Audrey reported without hesitation. "It includes documented proof that Mr. Hallowell personally overrode quantitative safety alerts on the Apex Dynamics deal, explicitly suppressed risk warnings submitted by former senior architect Julian Vance, and improperly authorized an $85 million capital deployment into a failing asset." The boardroom erupted into stunned murmuring. Jeffrey Hallowell, seated near the chairman, stood up abruptly, his face pale and contorted with anger. "This is an unauthorized mutiny. Miss Sinclair has no legal standing to present unverified administrative documents." Silence. "Jeffrey!" the chairman barked, slamming his fist onto the mahogany table. He turned to Audrey. "Where is Julian Vance currently?" "Mr. Vance is currently standing in the ground floor lobby," Audrey replied calmly. "He has agreed to address the board of directors upon formal invitation." 5 minutes later, the heavy oak doors of the executive boardroom opened. I stepped into the room wearing my dark charcoal wool suit, my posture straight, my father's silver watch chain visible on my lapel. The room grew completely silent as every member of the board turned to look at me. The chairman stood, offering a respectful nod. "Thank you for coming on such short notice, Mr. Vance. As you are aware, Crestview is facing an unprecedented institutional crisis. Our risk systems are frozen, our primary accounts are liquidating, and our reputation is severely damaged. We require your immediate technical expertise to stabilize the institution." I walked to the head of the table, looking across at Jeffrey Hallowell, who stood rigid, gripping the edge of his leather chair. "I am prepared to assist in stabilizing Crestview Financial Partners," I stated, my voice resonant and clear. "I will integrate the new Vanguard Enterprise Risk Platform under a joint institutional partnership with Sovereign and Drake Financial. However, my return is contingent upon one non-negotiable executive condition." "State your condition." "Mr. Vance," the chairman responded. I looked directly into Jeffrey's eyes. "Jeffrey Hallowell must execute an immediate, irrevocable resignation from Crestview Financial Partners, effective this minute, in front of this entire board. Furthermore, he must surrender all executive severance packages and accept full personal accountability for the compliance breaches documented in Ms. Sinclair's report." The room was motionless. Not a single board member spoke in Jeffrey's defense. The arrogance that had defined Jeffrey's career for a decade evaporated in an instant. Realizing that the board was prepared to vote unanimously for his termination and pursue civil litigation under elder financial abuse and fiduciary fraud statutes if he refused, Jeffrey's hand began to tremble violently. He picked up a pen, signed the formal resignation document resting on the table, and shoved the paper at the chairman. Without saying a word, without looking at a single colleague, Jeffrey turned and walked toward the exit. As he passed me, his eyes met mine for a fraction of a second, a mix of profound defeat, resentment, and the painful realization that he had been completely outmatched by the man he had dismissed as mere operational staff. The oak doors clicked shut behind him. The chairman exhaled deeply, looking at the remaining board members before turning back to me. Per Mr. Vance's proposal, and following Mr. Hallowell's resignation, the Board of Directors hereby appoints Julian Vance as Chief Executive Officer of Crestview Financial Partners, effective immediately, pending formal shareholder ratification in 90 days. The board members stood, offering unanimous applause. Audrey Sinclair smiled warmly, stepping forward to shake my hand. Welcome back, Chief Executive Officer Vance. 1 year has passed since that pivotal morning in the executive boardroom. Crestview Financial Partners is no longer the arrogant, opaque institution it once was. Under my leadership as CEO, in close operational partnership with Grant Montgomery and Sovereign and Drake Financial, we have completely restructured the firm's governance. We establish absolute operational transparency. Every portfolio risk metric, every yield curve, and every executive decision is displayed openly to our institutional clients. We launched the Vance Quantitative Leadership Fund, a specialized corporate initiative dedicated to recruiting, mentoring, and advancing talented analysts from underrepresented backgrounds, ensuring that brilliant minds are never buried beneath corporate politics again. My mother Eleanor's health has stabilized significantly, her laughter once again filling our home. My son Gabriel proudly tells his school friends that his father leads an institution built on truth, competence, and honor. Earlier today, I walked down the quiet corridor of the 38th floor, stopping outside the central conference room. On the mahogany table sat a small velvet box presented to me by the senior analytical staff on the anniversary of my appointment. Inside was an antique silver clock, its hands frozen at precisely 8 o'clock, the exact time I was fired 1 year ago. I picked up the key, wound the internal mechanism, and watched as the second hand began to move forward with smooth, steady precision. I looked out through the floor-to-ceiling glass wall. New York City stretched endlessly beneath the morning sun, illuminated in warm gold light. It was not the glare of personal vengeance, but the clear, enduring light of professional vindication. I smiled softly to myself. Not merely because we had triumphed over corporate betrayal, but because at long last, the architecture of truth was standing strong. Which moment in Julian's journey resonated most deeply with your own professional experience? Have you ever witnessed executive arrogance attempt to overshadow genuine competence? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. I read every single response. If you believe in powerful stories where integrity, legal precision, and quiet brilliance ultimately prevail over corporate injustice, please remember to subscribe and turn on notifications. Thank you for listening, and thank you for standing with us on this journey.